Welcome to Bible study. We are preparing this study for Sunday, May 1st, and we are looking today at the text in 2 Kings chapters 2 and 3 together. So if you would please open to that with me and be able to follow along a little bit as we talk, that would be great. Last week, we really looked at the ascension of Elijah into heaven, kind of from Elijah's perspective. If you remember, he had this strange encounter with these men. I mean, he called down fire from heaven, and you kind of get this sense of why. And you almost have a sense that Elijah is really a servant of God, having a bit of a mental crisis at this point. He's just angry, crabby. Finally, the word of the Lord comes to him and says, "Go with them. Don't be afraid. Just go." He delivers his message. He is then brought into heaven, and that ends the ministry of really the one who's considered sort of the paragon of Old Testament prophets after Moses. But now I want to look at this story a little bit from the perspective of his successor, and that is Elisha. Elisha, if you remember, had been chosen by God to be Elijah's helper, and we haven't really heard much about him to this point. He showed up in an earlier scene of his call when Elijah had chosen him, and then he apparently is there, but not ever mentioned. Now, however, he comes front and center. Throughout the entire ascension of Elijah, as a leading up to it, Elijah seems to be pushing him away. Stay here, stay here. No, I won't stay here. No, I won't stay here. It really feels to me like Elijah is testing or almost giving himself an escape clause, if you will, in this, saying, "Look, Elisha, I told you to stay. I tried to push you away." But Elisha insists. He keeps persistently following Elijah, until finally he witnesses his master taken up into heaven. He picks up the cloak that was on the ground, and the promise is fulfilled. He receives a double portion of Elijah's spirit, and he becomes the successor prophet to Elijah. But Elisha is a very different guy. He is very different than Elijah. And I think that's actually part of the message here, because Elijah was really, he was very much an outsider. He liked to stand on the outside. He wore his strange clothes, and he railed against the evils of King Ahab and the house of Omri, and he would sort of throw hand grenades into everything and blow things up. Elisha, on the other hand, is pretty consistently going to be found inside the structures, the monarchy, the army, inside the cities. He's inside the community of Israel. Now, some of this is due to the fact that eventually the house of Omri will fall and be replaced by the house of Jehu, which is far more faithful to God than Omri and Ahab had been. But even that, doesn't fully explain exactly what is happening here. And I think you have to go back to that moment when Elijah is railing against God, saying, "I'm ready to die, I'm quitting, it's not working." It was when he was on Mount Horeb, and God came to him first there was a manifestation of God in wind and fire and earthquake, and then that still small voice. And it is then that Elijah realized, I'm in the presence of God. What was different? The earthquake, the fire, the wind, that sounds very much like the God that showed up with Moses. Now we're going to see God working differently. And in the transition between Elijah and Elisha, we will see God start to work now, not so much as some exterior or outside force, but instead work through the people, through the means that are already there. And for the people who were in exile, I think this is intentional. They're trying to give them an expectation that the God who freed them from bondage in Israel will free them from bondage in Babylon, but he's probably not going to do it the same way. In fact, he will do it a very different way. So surprisingly different that many of the people fail to recognize it as an act of God. And so what this section of the Deuteronomic history is trying to do is to say, listen, God works in a different way. God works in many ways. And God is going to work through this servant very differently than he does through Elijah, but he still has that double measure of Elijah's spirit, and it is still the same Lord who is working through him. But first we have to get a little bit of an introduction to this character of Elisha. He picks up the cloak of Elijah, walks over to the Jordan River, and says, where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? And with that, he strikes the water just as his master had done. And what do you know? Exactly the same miracle. The waters part and Elijah crosses on dry ground. Remember, there's 50 prophets of Israel who are watching this. And so they come up to Elisha and say, we saw what happened. We saw what came here. The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha now. And they said, see now, we have 50 strong men among your servants. Let us go and seek your master. It may be that the Spirit of the Lord has caught him up and thrown him down on some mountain or into some valley. They assume he's sort of been sucked up into a tornado and thrown back down. They'll find his corpse. And Elisha says, don't bother. But they prevail upon him. They urge him. And finally he says, okay, go. And when they came back and said they didn't find him, he said, told you. In the very mundaneness of that conversation, that you just don't get a sense that Elijah would have ever brooked somebody disagreeing with him. Or if he had, he would have sort of exploded and railed against them. Not Elisha. They come up to Elisha. They say, let's go look for the body of Elijah. And he says, yeah, you're not going to find it. It's not going to work. But they want to go anyway. And so they go. And Elisha says, fine, go. Waste your time. And they do. And they come back and Elisha says, told you. You weren't going to find him. But notice that that's a very different kind of relationship than they had with Elijah. Elijah was this sort of towering figure who spoke for God and pronounced things. With Elisha, they'll get into conversations. And it'll be messy. It won't always be simple and clear. But for the discerning eye, for the person who's really looking, you're going to be able to find the same spirit of Elijah inside the ministry of Elisha. And we're going to see that in a couple of quick little stories that we get. The people of the city, Jericho, said to Elisha, the location of this city is good. It was right on a major crossroads. It was a great place to set up a roadblock and collect taxes. But as my Lord sees, the water is bad and the land is unfruitful. And he said, bring me a new bowl and put salt in it. So they brought him a new bowl and put salt in it. And then he went to the spring of water and threw the salt into it. And he said, "Thus says the Lord, I have made this water wholesome. From now on, neither death nor miscarriage shall come from it." So the water has been wholesome to this day, according to the word that Elisha spoke. And so you see here Elisha performing a miracle. He purifies a well that had, been alkaline, maybe been something wrong with the water that was making people sick. He performs this ritual act, throwing salt out of a new bowl, and it works. It's been pure to this day. You see Elisha doing more things like this, not a demonstration of God's power simply for the demonstration's sake, not like Elijah on Mount Carmel calling down fire or zapping these 102 men as they came to arrest him. Instead, you see Elisha showing up, people saying, "Hey, we have a problem. Our well is bad." And Elisha says, "Well, let's do something about that. Let's fix it. Let's make life better." The next one is, however, a little bit pushing the other way. He went up from there to Bethel. Remember, this is where Jacob has his dream of the angels going up and down the stairway to heaven. And while he was on the way, some boys came out of the city, and they jeered at him, saying, "Go away, bald head, go away, bald head." Kids haven't changed, apparently, in the last 3,000 years. When he turned around and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. And then 2 she-bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. From there he went on to Mount Carmel and returned to Samaria. It doesn't say it in so many words, but one kind of gets the sense that he's going to Bethel, to this site of historical significance. And he has this encounter with these boys, and he turns around and sort of flips a curse back at them. And it comes true. I really get the sense from this reading and from some other places in here that Elisha had to get used to the idea that God was backing up his words in this way. That God was taking everything Elisha said quite literally. And when Elisha pronounced a curse on somebody, God said, "Okay, they're cursed," and something would happen. Where today, and I think in this time too, taking the Lord's name emptily, that's what it means to take it in vain, saying something but not really expecting it to happen, was pretty common. But not when you're a prophet. When you are a prophet, you have to watch your words very carefully. We're going to pick it up here and take it into chapter 3 quickly. This is a story that we can read in a little more detail outside of the video here. But there is a war that happens. In the 18th year of King Jehoshaphat of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Ahab, becomes king over Israel. He reigns for 12 years. He, like his father, was evil, though not quite like his father. In other words, the Jehoram of Israel is a little better. He did remove the pillar of Baal that his father had made, but nevertheless he clung to the sin of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. He's not letting people go to the temple. At this point, the king of Moab rebels. And if you remember from an earlier part of this study, the kingdom of Moab was really important for the economic viability of Israel and Judah, because that sat right across and astride this major caravan route. And the king of Moab used to deliver to the king of Israel 100,000 lambs. He paid this huge tribute every year. But when Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled. And King Jehoram marched out, and he sent word to Jehoshaphat of Judah, "Will you go with me?" And he says, "My troops are like your troops. I am with you, my people are your people, my horses are your horses. And then they said, which way shall we go? Let's go south. Let's do this kind of an end around thing. We'll go through the land of Edom. And so the king of Israel, the king of Judah, and the king of Edom now join in on this. And they go around and they have a logistics nightmare. They run out of water for all their troops out in this brutal desert, which is just part of the Negev. I don't know whether they were expecting to find a spring that had dried up or to find some source of water that was not there. And it's looking like they're not going to make it out of there. And the king of Israel said, the Lord has summoned us 3 kings only to be handed over to Moab. We're all going to die. But Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah in the south, said, do we have a prophet along that we could inquire of the Lord? And they said, well, Elisha is here, the son of Shaphat, who used to pour water on the hands of Elijah. And Jehoshaphat said, the word of the Lord is with him. So they brought him. And Elijah comes in. And this is one that's very interesting. Can you imagine Elijah joining the army and marching off with the forces of Israel? Probably not. Certainly not with Ahab in charge. Ahab had a price on his head. But Elisha is found in the army. He's apparently serving as a soldier. They bring him in, and Elisha says to the son of Ahab, no, I'm not talking to you, but for Jehoshaphat's sake, I'm going to talk. And he gives them a prophecy that water will come, and that God will save them, and that Moab will be utterly destroyed. And that's what happens. There's a great, these. If you've ever been in the desert Southwest, you know that you can drown very easily because it can rain somewhere else, and because the water absorbs no moisture, it just runs down these wadis, these river valleys, and you can suddenly find yourself in 20 feet of water, and you've never felt a drop of rain. It appears they have something akin to that. And he says, this is only a trifle in the sight of the Lord. He will also hand Moab over to you. And you shall conquer every fortified city, and every choice spring, and every good tree you shall fell, and every spring of water you will stop up. The next day, about the time of the morning offering, suddenly water began to flow from the direction of Edom until the country was filled with water. When all the Moabites heard about this, they come out, they see the water, but the sun is shining on it in a funny way. It looks like blood. They think, they've all turned on each other, and the Moabites run in only to discover, nope, Israel's all ready to go. And there's a great slaughter of the Moabites. But then at the end of this, we get this really strange little story. When the king of Moab saw that the battle was going against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through opposite the king of Edom, but they could not. So he tries to break out, but he is thwarted and turned back. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him, and offered him as a burnt offering on the wall. And a great wrath came upon Israel, so they withdrew from him and returned to their own land. Did that sacrifice work? Was there some entity, some demonic being, something that answered that prayer to spare the city of Moab? I don't know. It's a really, really perplexing and strange passage, which gives us an occasion to talk more, I hope. We hope to see you on Sunday for the Bible study and for church. And if anybody has a question about this, you're always welcome to email me. We'll be talking to you soon. God bless you all. Bye-bye.